Reporter Mark Reddie is in Sydney for us. How's the social distancing going there, Mark?
Well, Lorna, you can probably see just the crowds to my left here. There is absolutely no social distancing taking place, and that was expected. That's why the government was trying to enforce a ban on this rally by going to the Supreme Court to make sure that people weren't gathering in large numbers. The concern being there could be a spike in coronavirus cases. Right now, we're seeing a very heavy police presence here with thousands of people gathered outside Town Hall. You can probably see all these police here lined up on the corner of Bathurst and George Streets. We're seeing a lot of people with placards through the crowd saying racism is a pandemic too. There's also quite a number of people with 432 on their placards, and that is in reference to the number of deaths in custody among Indigenous people since the 1991 Royal Commission. But things have become quite peaceful. Earlier there was quite a serious scuffle with a counter-protester putting up a sign saying all lives matter, and that really kicked off things. Protesters turned on him. Police had to drag him out through the crowd to a chocolate shop in the QVB. I did witness one protester spit on a police officer as that was happening. I think it was very unclear exactly why police were intervening in that situation. So at least one man has been arrested. But of course, there is really a sense of relief now that these protests can go ahead among the crowd here. Let's take a listen to one woman who I spoke to earlier.
Oh, it's tremendous. You just heard the uproar rising of all the people there just being so happy that they're able to march, which is fantastic, because that's why we're all here regardless of what the Supreme Court said. I think it was really important for everyone to get together for the one cause.
And why are you here today?
Well, my husband, he's Indigenous, and that's so important for us to be able to fight for Black Indigenous rights, but also human rights.
Mark, looking at the pictures behind you and also the other live shot that we've got in Sydney, I wonder what the police instructions have been, because obviously last night and this morning, before the appeal court overturned this decision, authorities were saying if you do this march, you are in breach of these guidelines and it will be against the law. But the police seem very relaxed where you are.
Yeah, they are, and really it's just been a conversation between protesters and police. Things are quite calm at the moment. I think the fact that the ban was overturned was really sort of helped ease those tensions between protesters and police. Of course, there is a lot of reference by protesters with signs about police brutality, so already there was tension there, and I think with the ban as well, it only added fuel to the fire. So right now we are hearing from a number of speakers up on on Town Hall steps, and once that happens, we're expecting this huge crowd here. You can literally see them to my left here. It's absolutely packed. The light rail is shut. And we're going to see this crowd eventually move down here to my right, up Bathurst Street, and then around to Hyde Park before it ends at Central Station. So it's about a K&a-half walk, and it's going to be very hard to see how social distancing can take place. We know in the Supreme Court there was an argument that if this rally were to go ahead, it would make sense for these streets to be opened just to protesters, so not traffic, so that they could try and socially distance. We also heard from Greens MP David Shoebridge about how there could be potentially 10 protesters at a time under escort by police moving through, but it seems like that's going to be unlikely just given the numbers.
Yeah, given those numbers, Mark, you say it's only a kilometre or so, the actual march, but I mean, how long is that going to take? We're what, 3:30 now?
Yeah, exactly, and people are still talking, so it could really take hours. I mean, this could really drag into the night. This was only expected to go for just a few hours, but it looks like it will go much longer. What we've also heard was from a number of Indigenous people here today who I spoke to earlier, and I asked them what are the issues they want projected out there, and there were a few. They said that the treatment by police was was one of them. And one lady I spoke to made reference to the 16-year-old Indigenous teenager who was had his legs kicked out underneath him by a white police officer in response to alleged threats of violence made by that Indigenous teenager. They also spoke about the deaths in custody being a very prominent issue, and they're also here, of course, in solidarity of protesters in the United States mourning the death of George Floyd.
Yeah, and we've got some aerial pictures of where you are as well, Mark, which is just incredible to see the numbers, really huge numbers of people lining those streets, Bathurst and George, as you say, and getting in your way as you're trying to do your job. Do you get the sense that they want the politicians of Australia to do something? Because it's very much piggybacked on the Black Lives Matter protests that have begun around George Floyd's death. But the focus very much here in Australia has been on Indigenous deaths in custody and rights for Indigenous communities. I wonder whether people want politicians now to come forward and say something on this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the Indigenous people I spoke to here today, there was a woman, a Gadigal woman, and we are, of course, on Gadigal land. They are the traditional custodians of this land. And she said that she wants police to address the high numbers of Indigenous people in custody. So we know that they make up 3% of the population, but 3% of the population. We're just going to follow this rally here.
I wonder if that's the start of the march
right now. It is the start of the march. We're just going to follow this crowd if we can. So right now, these are the first protesters taking place, and you can see right now they are being stopped by police at this intersection, and it is peaceful. Police are just telling them to wait a second before they allow them to go through to Hyde Park. You can see this is quite an emotional scene here as well. You've got a lot of people very upset, a lot of emotions running high, people in tears.
The police line in the march. Anyone that is in behind the police line in the march.
So I think what's happening right now is they're trying to socially distance the crowd, and I don't really know how that's going to happen, because if you look at all those numbers back there, this could drag on well into the early hours of the morning. It's really going to be quite bizarre to see how this is able to happen.
And yeah, as many photographers at the front there as there are people who want to start the march. Let's take a look at those the banners there, Mark. What are they?
Yeah, so right now we're seeing our Dun warrior, and that's obviously in reference to David Dungay, who was a 26-year-old Indigenous man who died in Long Bay Jail about 5 years ago, and he actually mouthed the words, "I can't breathe," when that, and they of course similar words to George Floyd, and a lot of protesters have made that comparison that I've spoken to, saying that that there are similarities drawn to the United States. So you can see right now, just over to my left here, people are starting to march down the light rail, and it's unclear though what's going to happen once they all converge in this area, because they're being stopped by police, but
where are the police, Mark?
It's all very sort of... Yeah, so I'll just get my cameraman to spin around. Police are over here. You can see a huge line of them. Mm-hmm. So they're going to stop the protesters from going down George Street directly to Central. Instead, I'm told it looks like they've changed the route. So it looks like people are going to be going down George Street as opposed to Bathurst Street. So... yeah, it's unclear. There have been changes to the route throughout the day, depending on crowd numbers and numbers of police too. So we're just going to move out of the way because it's getting...
Yeah, no worries. You stay back a bit. Tell me, who's speaking on the loudspeaker, Mark? Who is the issuing instructions?
Yeah, so at the moment, I imagine... the people speaking here, these are obviously a large number of Indigenous Australians leading the march. Of course, this is their cause and really the main message of this protest, we might sort of follow them if we can.
Yep.
They seem to they see the Aboriginal flags there. We've got, and they're actually leading the march before everyone decides to join. And I might just see if I can speak to one of them. Hi there. Can I just you're live on ABC. Can I tell you what's the mood like here today?
Oh, it's amazing to see this amount of people come out to support us. It's amazing. It's the best feeling. I think the more non-Indigenous people that get behind us in this country, that's the only way we're going to be heard.
And are you glad?
White people get behind us, that's the only way the white government's going to look at making change. Sadly, that's the way it's going to be. But I think
are you glad to see that the ban was overturned?
Yeah. But we still got no justice. We've still got to keep pushing.
And what are some of the issues that you want addressed?
Oh, there's so many. What are some of the issues we want to address? There's so many. There's so many issues. There's probably too many. Like, we just, look at it. You just got to look at our rates in this country now. We've got the highest suicide rates in the whole world. Our institutionalised rates are higher than any other, anybody else in this country. Non-Indigenous people, not, compared to non-Indigenous people. You just got to look at those stats and look, there's so many. So it's up to everybody just to get behind us, and we've got to walk this walk together. And I'll keep doing it because I come from a strong bloodline of activists in my family, so I'm going to keep going. I'll keep doing it.
You enjoy the march. Thank you. Okay, Lorna, it is quite hard to hear you, but you can see this is really kicking off now.
Yeah, she was really passionate as well, wasn't she, Mark? I know you're going to struggle to hear me, but let's just watch some of those protesters go past.
Who's fight? I'll fight. Who's fight? Who's fight? Who's fight? Who's fight?
Okay, you can see that sign there, Lorna, that the 400 plus deaths, that's referring to the number of deaths in custody since the 1991 Royal Commission.
Whose lives matter? Whose lives matter?
Swing over here. You can
Whose lives matter?
so many people from all walks of life joining.
Whose lives matter?
Yeah, and that's what strikes you, isn't it, Mark? That there's a little toddler being carried there, old people, young people of all colours, shapes and sizes joining the march. Black deaths in custody, obviously an issue for Australia, but many as well supporting the marches that started across the United States. And just interesting that it's all culminated, particularly in Australia this weekend, nearly 2 weeks after George Floyd's death.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we already saw a protest on Tuesday, which was similar to this, but much smaller. So, I mean, you would have to say that there were tens of thousands of people marching today. It's remarkable. The crowd just keeps growing. I'm just warning my cameraman there, there's a car parked.
Yeah, and obviously...
it really is.
Go on, Mark.
Yeah, no, it is really quite remarkable to see all these. You just see there Black Lives Matter signs. David Dungay mentioned again on that sign. He, of course, has been quite the focus of these protests as well, being a very high-profile death in custody in a Sydney prison. And
interesting to see from your shots, particularly that really the majority of people, although the social distancing has gone out the window somewhat, are wearing masks.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, most people are wearing masks, and I think where possible they are trying to be socially distant, but really the whole protest itself, it is hard to see how a protest can be socially distant, especially when you see such passion and energy from a crowd who really are trying to raise awareness about deaths in custody, but also standing in solidarity with those protesters across the United States, remembering the death of George Floyd.
Mark, we'll let you get your composure and go and talk to a few more people. Thank you so much for bringing us a real flavour of what's happening on the streets of Sydney there, you and your cameraman there. And we will, of course, return to Mark on the streets there. Thanks, Mark.